Chapter 14. Leaving Michelle to distract Andrew, Shera slipped toward the darker end of the salon, past the bar. The low thrum of music vibrated under her feet, muffled by thick carpet. Her hand brushed the cool brass handle of the office door. It had been a while since she'd been here, and the memories were still sharp. Too sharp. Shera inhaled slowly, pressing her palm flat against the door. Although she'd seen Daniel since leaving the bar, they'd never met here. This was his kingdom, the heart of his operation. A private space where his guard would be down, or at least lower than usual. She pushed the handle and stepped inside, closing the door behind her with a soft click. The office was dimly lit, the green glow of a banker's lamp casting sharp shadows across the dark wood of the desk and the thick bookshelves lining the walls. The music from the salon barely seeped through the heavy door. Daniel sat behind the desk, bent over a stack of papers. His long blonde hair, slightly tousled, fell over part of his face. He was tall and lean, broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist, dressed in a black shirt that clung to his frame. The soft light made his features seem sharper, almost carved from marble. He didn't look up at first. Michelle? His voice was low and rough, distracted. Shera's lips twitched. He hadn't even considered that it might be her. That made her smile just a little. Daniel lifted his head, and the moment his green eyes locked onto hers, they widened. Shera. His mouth twisted into a smile. It's been a while. Vampires aged slowly, barely changing over the centuries. Their faces remained frozen in time, ageless, inhumanly perfect. And yet, Shera felt different each time Daniel saw her. Not in appearance, but in presence. Her gaze, cold, calculating, made him uneasy. He never knew what she was thinking. She could be toying with you, or deciding how to kill you. He'd seen her do both. Shera didn't answer. She slid into the armchair opposite him, crossing one leg over the other, her eyes steady and direct. "I need information," she said. Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms resting casually on the armrests. His smile didn't fade. "About?" "The abductions. The ones tied to vampires?" His tone was casual, almost dismissive. "I've heard rumors." Shera's gaze sharpened. "What kind of rumors?" He shrugged. "Just bar talk. Nothing worth repeating." "Liar." Shera leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. The lamp's green light caught the sharp angle of her cheekbones. "Daniel," she said, her voice low, "we used to work together. You always know more than you admit." "Actually?" Daniel's smile deepened. He leaned in, closing the distance between them until his breath was a slow whisper against her skin. "Late-night bar talk is the best source of information. You should know that." The corner of his mouth curled upward, a flicker of something dangerous in his gaze, amusement perhaps. His green eyes glittered with the kind of heat that made most people nervous. But Shera wasn't most people. She held his gaze without flinching. "You know that's not the kind of information I'm looking for." Daniel leaned back, stretching his arms behind his head. His smile never slipped. "Unfortunately, I don't have what you're looking for." Liar. He was enjoying this. Shera could always unsettle him, and he liked it. Their meetings were games, and Daniel played to draw her out, to test how long he could keep her before she lost patience. Her expression didn't change. "What do you know about the kidnappings?" "I told you, only rumors." "What kind of rumors?" Daniel's smile sharpened at the edge. He reached for his cigarettes with slow, practiced ease, sliding a lighter from his pocket. He tapped the cigarette once against the desk before lighting it. The flame flickered between them before dying. Daniel took a long drag, smoke curling from his lips. Shera's eyes narrowed. "Why bother? You can't even taste it." Daniel's smile deepened. "Some vices are hard to shake, even after 500 years. He exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. "Besides, if I can indulge without the threat of cancer, why not?" They stared at each other across the desk. A heavy silence settled between them, the kind of silence that comes when two predators size each other up. Shira could see him calculating, weighing how much to tell her. He liked this game, but not as much as he liked winning. Finally, Daniel's smile faded. It seems Lord Kronos is preparing for a strike. He's tired of this static war. Shira's gaze sharpened. What about the peace talks? Daniel exhaled slowly, his eyes darkening. About to become very inconvenient. Daniel's smile thinned. Everyone knows it's a waste of time. A stalling tactic. His eyes darkened beneath the green glow of the lamp. Both sides are preparing for open war. Things have evolved too much to keep playing this game of the hunt. He tapped his cigarette against the edge of the ashtray, the soft click loud in the silence. And if this drags on much longer, the Council are going to find themselves without soldiers. The Saravians are losing fighters. Fewer and fewer are willing to die for the salvation of humanity. Shara scoffed. Let's be serious, Daniel. Nobody's fighting to protect humanity anymore. Why would they? Humans think we're monsters. Her voice sharpened. This war stopped being about saving humanity a long time ago. Now it's about power. Daniel's smile returned, colder this time. Exactly. And if the Council wants to stay in power, they need a win. Soon. A small victory. Something to keep their soldiers motivated. Her eyes narrowed. And the kidnappings? Daniel's gaze flicked toward her, the green light catching a glint of sharpness in his eyes. The Saravians aren't the only ones facing problems. The Asharis have their own internal issues. Shira's hand tightened on the edge of the desk. What kind of issues? A rebellion. Daniel's voice lowered. A group of younger vampires, tired of Kronos' grip on power, tried to overthrow him. He drew in a slow drag of smoke, letting it curl from his mouth. Kronos crushed them, but it made him realize it's only a matter of time before another group tries the same thing. He needs a win, too. And fast. The kidnappings, Daniel, Shara snapped. Daniel's smile deepened at her impatience. He liked pushing her, always had. But there was no amusement in his tone when he said, I don't know anything concrete, but the kidnapped aren't human. Shira's brows drew together. Not human. Daniel shook his head. Vampires. Shara pushed off the desk, rising to her feet. Her pulse quickened. Why would anyone kidnap vampires? Daniel turned his chair toward her as she paced around the desk. His gaze followed her, lingering. Not just any vampires? Shara stopped and turned toward him, her voice dropped. Who are they? Daniel's green eyes glittered under the lamplight. As I said, I don't have anything concrete, but it seems that whoever they are, they're old blood. Old blood? Shara murmured. That's impossible. Old bloods were extremely old vampires who kept entirely to themselves. No one knew how many there were or where they lived. They were more legend than reality. Are you telling me that there weren't just one but 3 of them in this town, and the Asharis are kidnapping them? Daniel leaned back, cigarette balanced between 2 fingers. That's the rumor. He took a deep drag and exhaled, smoke curling around his words. If that's true, Craven must already know. Shara's pulse quickened. Do you know who they are? Daniel inclined his head slightly. No, but the rumor has it that they're several thousand years old. His smile was faint, but the cold edge behind it was unmistakable. Hard to believe, even for us. Shara was stunned, the realization hitting her like a punch to the gut. Old bloods in this town, snatched away by the Asharis. It was almost too much to wrap her mind around. What does Kronos want with them? Daniel's expression darkened. I don't know. Not yet. This time Shara believed him. Daniel had told her everything he knew, or almost everything. Can you find out? Shara asked, leaning towards him and resting her hand on the back of his chair. Daniel's eyes flicked toward her hand before meeting her gaze. Maybe. The door creaked open. Shearer's eyes sharpened as Andrew stepped inside. He'd managed to shake Michelle. His expression was tense, his gaze flicking between her and Daniel. "Sorry, but I couldn't keep him," Michelle said from behind Andrew, sounding bored. Shearer's eyes cooled. She moved closer to Daniel and, without looking away from him, reached for his cigarette. She plucked it from his fingers and smashed it in her palm. "If you want to die, find a more efficient method," she said, letting the broken remaining of the cigarette hang between her fingers. Daniel's smile sharpened. She rose and stepped toward the door. "I'll do my best to find answers," Daniel said, his gaze flicking to Andrew with mild curiosity. It had been a long time since a human had stepped into his club and survived. "I'm sure you will," Shearer said as she passed Andrew without looking at him. Andrew stood frozen for a moment, glaring at Daniel from across the room. Daniel's smile didn't fade. Andrew's jaw tightened. His anger simmered beneath the surface. He didn't know why it pissed him off so much seeing Shearer with Daniel. But it did. He was tired of being sidelined, tired of her keeping him in the dark. He followed her into the loud music of the club, his pulse drumming in his ears. His mind spun with questions, but his chest tightened with something closer to frustration. "Shearer!" A voice cut through the noise. Shearer's hand shot out, grabbing Andrew's wrist. She quickened her pace toward the exit. "Shearer!" The voice was closer now. "Damn it," Shearer muttered. A figure stepped into their path. "Hey, Shearer, we haven't seen each other in a long time." Andrew's gaze sharpened on the newcomer. The man looked to be in his late 30s, maybe early 40s. He was well-built, tall with sharp features and piercing blue eyes. He smiled at Shearer, clearly pleased to see her. "Did you get tired of hunting so fast?" Andrew's gaze narrowed. The man's smile faltered as his eyes drifted toward Andrew. His expression darkened. "And what's he doing here?" Andrew tensed as the man's gaze sharpened. His smile twisted into something harder. Andrew could almost feel the heat radiating off the man's stare. His muscles coiled, preparing for a fight. Shearer's hand tightened around Andrew's wrist. Andrew's breath quickened. He didn't know why the man's attention made his skin crawl, but it did. Shearer stepped between them and placed her hand on the man's chest. Though tense, Andrew couldn't help but notice how small and delicate her hand looked against the stranger's broad torso. A flicker of something unpleasant twisted in his chest, concern maybe, or the bitter taste of jealousy. "He's with me," she stated firmly, her voice leaving no room for argument. That declaration seemed sufficient for the imposing figure. His face softened, the dangerous glint in his eyes fading into something more relaxed, mocking even. Any trace of hatred or anger vanished, replaced by an ironic smile. Despite the shift, Andrew remained uneasy, his muscles coiled tight, ready to react if the situation deteriorated. "Did you settle on a pet, then?" the man asked with a sharp smile. "Or are you just sampling the other side's leash?" Shearer's lips curled into a mocking smile. "You'd be surprised at what they're capable of if they set their minds on it." Without another word, she stepped past the man and headed straight for the exit. Andrew hesitated, unsure of his next move. The stranger's gaze followed him, glinting with undisguised contempt. That malicious smile widened, dripping with condescension, igniting a spark of anger in Andrew's chest. He strode past, biting back a curse and promising himself that this bizarre situation would come to an end soon, preferably on his terms. The cold night air struck him like a physical blow as he stepped outside. It wasn't unpleasant, more like a bracing slap to the face after the stifling atmosphere of the club. He stood motionless before the entrance, letting the crisp air burn through the lingering tension in his chest. The rain resumed, soft and persistent, but he remained rooted to the spot, trying to clear his mind of the thoughts that buzzed incessantly like mosquitoes, persistent and impossible to escape no matter how hard he tried. Weariness settled deep in his bones, making him feel decades older than his years. For the first time since taking on this case, Andrew considered walking away from it altogether. He was exhausted, despite having accomplished nothing concrete. And then there was Shira, who seemed to be muddying the waters rather than helping him navigate them. He'd known her for barely a day, and already that brief acquaintance had cost him his working relationship with Matthew. Worse, he couldn't shake the feeling that this Daniel wasn't merely a nightclub owner. The image of Shira and Daniel standing so close together nagged at him, stirring something uncomfortable in his chest. "Are you coming or not?" Shira called out, opening the car door to make herself heard above the howling wind, which had intensified in the past few minutes. "I'll drive you to the station," she added once he slid into the passenger seat and closed the door. Although a million questions raced through his mind, a weary resignation settled over him as he sank into the seat. He'd been interrogating her all day and received nothing but evasion in return. She wasn't going to give him anything now. If he wanted answers, he'd have to find them on his own, away from her watchful gaze. For now, it was better to play along. They drove in complete silence toward the station. Shira had expected him to start questioning her again. It had been his pattern all day, but his uncharacteristic silence unnerved her. After what he had just witnessed, he should have been full of questions. He wasn't the type to let things go. She had read his file. He was relentless when it came to uncovering the truth. He must be plotting something. She had been so focused on pursuing her own answers that she hadn't properly considered the consequences of bringing him to the club. What had she been thinking, bringing him along? And then there was the matter of Craven. Something significant was happening, and Shira needed to figure out what without arousing anyone's suspicion, which meant she couldn't cut him loose just yet. She needed him, if only as cover. But the problem wasn't keeping him close. It was figuring out why, despite every instinct warning her to cut him loose, she didn't want to. She shifted her gaze from the road and glanced at him. He reclined in his seat, head tilted back, eyes closed. His measured breathing told her he wasn't asleep, merely retreating into his thoughts. For several moments she forgot she was driving, caught up in studying the sharp lines of his face in the dim interior light. Certain aspects of his face triggered a strange familiarity, reminding her of someone from her past, but before she could chase the thought. "You should be watching the road," Andrew remarked calmly, his eyes still closed. She flinched, realizing he had been monitoring her from beneath those heavy lids. Slightly embarrassed at being caught, she turned her attention back to the road, just in time to avoid a car that had drifted into their lane. Her hands tightened on the wheel. She accelerated slightly, half expecting him to comment, but he remained silent. The emptiness of the late-hour streets made the silence between them feel heavier. The absence of traffic only heightened the sense that they were trapped together in this uncomfortable quiet. Relief washed over her when she finally pulled into the police station's parking area and stopped beside his vehicle. Andrew didn't move immediately, prolonging their silent stalemate for several more minutes. Was he finally preparing to question her? "Good night," he said at last. "See you tomorrow morning." Without waiting for a reply, he climbed out of the car and into his own vehicle. Shira tracked his movements until his headlights disappeared down the street. Something was definitely amiss. Tomorrow she'd have to change her strategy. Andrew was getting too close, and if she wasn't careful, he would unravel more than just this case. She had to give him something, just enough to keep him in the game, but not enough to expose the truth. With these thoughts weighing on her mind, Shira started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. The headlights cut through the darkness as she disappeared into the night.